Hi, and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we look at the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Dan Larrabee.
And I'm Luke DeWolf.
We have a very exciting episode for you today. We're going to be chatting with Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. These names might not be all that familiar to our audience. We have mentioned them before, but they're not exactly in the Norse mythology world. However, what they have to say in their new book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, is exactly what we talk about in Norse mythology and the lessons that we're learning through these stories. And that's kind of why we have them on the show. Luke, do you want to go into more detail about our esteemed guests?
Definitely. We're very excited for this one, mostly because, honestly, Jocko and Leif are two of the most influential people in our lives personally. And yeah, it's exactly right that they are essentially acting out the lessons that we are exploring in the mythology, in the Poetic Edda, in the Kalevala. They are truly examples of literally heroes who go out into the most chaotic places and bring order into the world. And in their books, they have Extreme Ownership, which came out a few years ago and is a New York Times #1 best-selling book. It's a fantastic book. But in Extreme Ownership, and now their new book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, they tell stories about their time in combat in Iraq. They were with Task Unit Bruiser, which was a major SEAL unit in Iraq and involved in some of the most dangerous battles in the Battle of Ramadi, which is one of the most dangerous cities at that time. And they learned a lot of really, really deep things about leadership and about succeeding as a team. And the thing about it is that might not sound like exactly what we've been covering, but it really is, though, because we are looking for those examples in mythology that translate into the actions that we can live out in our lives today. And the thing is, Jocko and Leif, they've been doing it for a very long time, and they've learned some amazing lessons, and they've put it into their books. And honestly, it is truly an honor to get to speak with them, because they are absolutely part of the reason why we started this show. Actually, I don't think without Jocko also has a podcast, the Jocko Podcast. Without the Jocko Podcast and these books, well, previously it was just Extreme Ownership. Now it's more than one book. But without all that, honestly, I don't think we would have started this show, because they are really the example that we are trying to emulate.
Absolutely. Just with Extreme Ownership, the book is about exactly what the title is, and it's about taking extreme ownership over yourself and like going out and doing things. And that was definitely one of the catalysts for us, like going out and doing what needed to be done to do a podcast on, something that we cared about. Now, for them, what they cared about was being warriors and putting order in the world where there's chaos. I mean, we can't stress enough. One, because we weren't there and we can only go by what we've read about it. But in the Battle of Ramadi, they were literally fighting, building the building. And part of their strategy was to, go after a building, secure it, and keep it from, I guess they'd be fighting Al-Qaeda insurgents. And if you know anything about warfare, urban warfare is crazy, because there's just so many places that you can't see. It's not an open field, not an open battlefield. People are above you. They can be below you. They can be around corners, windows, all that kind of stuff. So that the chaos is real. And you have these incredible men like Leif Babin and Jocko Willink going there and imposing order on it. And I know the Iraq War wasn't necessarily a very popular war, but I can tell you from what I've heard from their personal experiences and what we've read based on them, the local population of Ramadi were very thankful they were there, because the thing about Al-Qaeda was that they were quite willing to kill the civilians there. And so they were actually liberating the civilians from Al-Qaeda. This one, say what you want about the war in total, but this particular battle's pretty cut and dry on like the good guys and the bad guys.
Definitely. And you know, the whole thing, and I don't know if we were explicit enough on this. So they were Navy SEALs. They were Navy SEAL officers, and Jocko was the leader of Task Unit Bruiser, and Leif was one of the platoon commanders, which is the just one level down, essentially. If you want more of a background on Jocko and Leif, better than we can provide, first of all, Extreme Ownership is a fantastic introduction just from, you know, our original experience. But then the Dichotomy of Leadership, already it starts off with just some really, really emotional stories, and you really get a feel for kind of them. And maybe another point about, you know, however you feel about the war, that shouldn't change the feeling of gratitude that, you know, I have about the people who are actually there, regardless of whatever was going on, you know, up at the top decisions, right? And they can explain their perspectives much better than I can. And really, it's just amazing what these guys have done. And if you want a really good background, first of all, the Jocko Podcast is a fantastic podcast in general. But episode 11 of the Jocko Podcast is with Jocko and Leif. It's the first time that they are talking together on his podcast, and it really goes into great detail about just their backgrounds, and they talk about some of the people that were kind of there around them, you know, people that have died actually, who were with them, who died in combat, and it's quite something, and certainly I would recommend going and taking a look. First of all, at that episode of Jocko's podcast, which we'll link to below here, but also the books Extreme Ownership, The Dichotomy of Leadership. They're both extremely influential on us as people, as individuals, and an inspiration for the show. Certainly, you know, Extreme Ownership is the only one that was out prior to our starting the show, but it was extremely influential. And now with the Dichotomy of Leadership, they've got two fantastic, amazing books. We'll link to the both of them, and you can purchase them from Amazon, or I'm sure it's going to be in stores everywhere. So,
absolutely. And I think in our excitement, we've forgotten a few things about where people can get in touch with us. Just before we go on, if you can't tell, we're pretty excited about this podcast. So some things might slip our minds, but you can find us on Facebook at Northern Myths Podcast, Instagram at Northern Myths Podcast, Twitter is at Northern Myth, and then we're both on Twitter at North Myth Luke and at North Myth Dan. Am I forgetting one of the?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. We have Facebook, Facebook, Twitter, Northern Myths. Yeah, it's all there, I think. So, no, I think we're pretty much all set to. They're going to be calling in here shortly, and they're certainly pressed for time because this is actually the day we're recording this episode is the release day of their book. So we're incredibly honored that they were able to take the time and speak with us. So.
Yeah, for some reason they literally went from national TV to talking to little old us, which is crazy. I don't know what, like, we're not ones to look a gift horse in the mouth, but it was kind of like, oh my goodness, why us? Like, really?
Exactly. So, no, I hope you see our enthusiasm, you hear our enthusiasm, and really, I hope you take a look at Jocko and Leif's new book, The Dichotomy of Leadership. Take a look at their first book, Extreme Ownership. Extreme Ownership isn't necessary to read The Dichotomy of Leadership, but it's highly recommended, and they're both available as audiobooks actually as well. If you prefer, obviously, if it's the podcast you're listening to here, you might prefer the audio format. So it's available as an audiobook for both books. That's how I consumed Extreme Ownership the best actually. So
the other thing we should mention, because it might be kind of puzzling, like, why would they write these books? They actually have a consulting business called Echelon Front, where they take the lessons that they learned on the battlefield and apply them to businesses who are struggling, and
or just who want to perform better.
Perform better. And the the lessons are crazy because you wouldn't think that war would necessarily translate to something like business because they seem worlds apart. But the lessons, they apply equally as well. And you can actually take it a step further and apply them to your own personal life. And we get into that a little bit, but it's crazy how universal these lessons are.
Right. So I think here, you know, the funny thing about these books is that I believe they're actually under like the business categories. If you look on Amazon or whatever, and they are sort of with that business mentality, but the lessons inside them, they appear to be universal, and that's just from our own personal experience, you know, of resonating with them. But, you know, tons of other people follow Jocko and Leif and listen to the Jocko podcast too. Leif is a regular visitor on that show, guest. So yeah, we're just really excited to get to talk with them. And after we've spoken with them, anything we didn't have a chance to cover, we'll make up that ground afterwards, and we'll try and make some connections that we would like to make to show how directly related to our show their books and their podcast and all that actually are. And yeah, we're just really excited, and yeah, hope you enjoy when they call in here.
Absolutely. And I guess we'll sign off for now, and next time you hear us, we'll be talking to Jocko and Leif.
Absolutely. Hello, this is Luke and Dan with the Northern Myths Podcast.
Luke and Dan, how you guys doing? You got Jocko Willink and Leif Babin here.
What's up, Luke and Dan?
We're excellent. Thanks so much. Really honored to have you speaking with us here.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Thanks for having us on.
Oh, not a problem at all.
Looking forward to talking to you guys.
We know you're on a tight schedule with the release of your new book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, today. So if it's all right with you, we'll just sort of get after it.
It is always all right with me if you decide to get after it. That's affirmative.
Get after it, approved.
Fantastic. And okay, so on our show, we talk a lot about dichotomy, but we don't use that exact word. We talk about the dichotomy of order and chaos a lot. And in your terms, that would be a lot like discipline and freedom. Our understanding of your new book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, is that it's a kind of a guidebook to balancing these sorts of opposing forces in order to succeed. How does that line up with your understanding of the dichotomy of leadership?
Yeah, that is what the book is about. It's about these opposing forces, and there's countless opposing forces that you have in your life pulling you in different directions, especially as a leader. And usually the best course of action is to remain balanced.
And everything you read and have been utilizing in extreme ownership can be taken too far. That's why we wrote this new book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, because you can take those things in extreme ownership, the concept of extreme ownership, taking ownership of everything in your world. And if you try to do everything, what does everybody else on the team do? Nothing. They sit back and wait to be told what to do. That's not decentralized command. Same thing for each of the 4 laws of combat. You can get too far out of balance in any of those things. You can cover and move too much and alienate others and tread on some egos and cause worse relationships. You can be too simple where people don't understand what the commander thinks. You can get target fixated when you're trying to prioritize and execute and get focused on a priority and not able to rapidly shift that priority. And you can also be too decentralized as well, where you're not letting the team actually step up and make calls and lead. So that's why we wrote this book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, to try to find that balance. It's one of the most significant problems and common problems that we see that all leaders have.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like you're going for something like having too much order in the world, trying to organize your life too much. And what this book is trying to do is bring back that balance.
Well, you don't necessarily have too much order. Some people have too much chaos in their world. And what you want to be is balanced. If you have too much order in your world, that means you might be not doing anything that you enjoy. You might not have any time to be creative and think of things that you hadn't thought of before. If you have too much chaos in your world, well, then you're disorganized and you're not making any progress, and that's problematic. So what we're actually looking for is balance.
And that's something that actually surprises people, though. They see Jocko, they see the pictures of his watch that get posted every morning and think, oh, he's disciplined. He's absolutely disciplined in all things. And yes, discipline does equal freedom, and that's true. But you can be too disciplined. I think to your point, you can be too disciplined, and Jocko wrote a whole chapter about this in the Dichotomy of Leadership. If you're too disciplined, then and you're too rigid in your thinking, then the team is only following step-by-step standard operating procedures and not actually thinking for themselves to solve problems.
Absolutely. That the balance seems to be in everything is the real key, I think. In your previous book, Extreme Ownership, when the way the chapters are organized and everything, it appears you were going from the perspective of the individual and sort of the work that a person has to do on themselves before they can hope to lead others and sort of expand their sphere of influence. And I noticed in the Dichotomy of Leadership, you actually sort of seem to be going from the other direction, from here's what's going on in your sphere of influence and working down towards what's going on inside that leader that might be going wrong inside that sphere of influence. I was wondering, was that a conscious choice, or, when you were setting up the book like that, did you know what you were doing, or did it just sort of happen that way?
I think that as we move forward in writing this book, that's the natural order that it fell into, and we're not ones to fight against nature.
Absolutely. That's a battle you can't win.
You can put up a good fight, but no, you will not win.
Definitely. Well, the examples in your book, they're from your perspectives as Navy SEALs in active duty in Iraq. Combat situations, very dangerous, extremely chaotic. You pick that up from the book right off the bat, essentially, and that's not something many people have done. But then, of course, you relate the principles you talk about in terms of business concepts. But we've really felt that these principles seem to apply much more universally beyond the business world, and I mean that's just from our own perspective. But you've said it yourselves that people from so many different walks of life use the ideas from your book, now books. Why do you think these lessons apply so universally?
Well, these principles do apply universally, and I think one of the examples of that is with families. And so if you've got kids, and I don't know if you have kids, I have 4 kids, and you have to be very balanced with how you treat your children. If, for instance, of course, we care about our children, and so we want to make things easy for them. But if we make everything too easy for them, then they never learn to fend for themselves. So you have to balance taking care of them with actually letting them brush up against the guardrails of failure and pain and suffering a little bit to make sure that they learn what that feels like and that they can drive through it. So yeah, these balances apply to everything from business to combat to your personal life.
And on that note, that's one of the things that I've learned as a husband with my wife and our 2 young kids. Oftentimes, if she's talking to me about a problem, I want to take extreme ownership of that problem. I want to solve that problem. I want to come up with a solution to that problem. I want to try to cover and move for her so that I can support her and she can do what she needs to do to solve that problem and we can win. And sometimes I realize I go too far in that direction. And oftentimes what I need to do is just take a step back and listen, because in trying to help her and trying to solve those problems and trying to aggressively maneuver to make it happen, that can actually cause more problems where she gets angry at me for jumping in on that. And I need to just take a step back, detach, and listen. So the dichotomy applies to everything in life, being a husband, being a dad, anything that you do.
I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one who's guilty of that with my spouse, because yeah, she'll have a problem and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to get after it and solve it. And really, she just wanted me to listen and vent. And then there's a whole other, issue.
We all suffer from that. You are not unique. That's for sure.
Well, certainly your books and also the Jocko podcast as well, of course, it seems to resonate with people on a really deep level, though. Do you have any idea why that seems to really get to people on such a deep level, not just in the specific examples that you talk about from the book?
I think it's because it's honest. It's honest, and it's an honest reflection of the things that I've been through. The book's an honest reflection of what we've been through. The podcast is an honest reflection of the way human nature reveals itself in the harshest of circumstances. And I think a lot of people are interested in that. They want to know it. They have an intuition about it, but to hear it confirmed and hear someone else explain it in a way that they understand, I think it hits them in the gut. I know that when I I mean, I get as much out of the podcast as anyone, if not more, because I'm reading these entire books and I'm parsing out the information that I think is pertinent, but I'm learning as much, if not more, than everyone else. So I have a gut reaction with that podcast, and I'm sure if you listen to it, you can see that sometimes it hits me in an emotional way. And I think that other people hear that. They know I'm not covering anything up. I'm exposing what my thoughts and feelings are, and I think people appreciate that these days when a lot of people are out there on the internet, on social media, and they're really putting up a bit of a facade about who they are and what they actually think. And I think people appreciate the fact that there's a group of people out there now that are actually exposing their weaknesses and being vulnerable in these situations.
You know, you've absolutely described the way I felt when I personally first found all your work. So just to hear that kind of I'm very grateful for the work that you have done, and it's very obviously from a place like that, a place of honesty. So, you know, first of all, thank you. But
we talk about failure is the biggest teacher, and if you don't talk about that, how are other people going to learn from those failures? That was something that resonated with me after my last deployment to Iraq in 2010. As the next SEAL team came in, we've been on the ground for 6 months. The next SEAL team came in. We spent a few days turning over with them, and I remember one of their key leaders telling us, "This is an amazing turnover. You're actually telling us all the things that you screwed up and where you made mistakes." And he was talking about that as if that hadn't happened before. And I thought, well, how in the world are they going to ever not make those same mistakes if you're not telling them what you screwed up and what went wrong? And we all make mistakes. Nobody's infallible. So we have to do that. That's something that, you know, we did that in Extreme Ownership. I think that's why it resonated with so many people. As Jocko said, that's exactly what we did here in the Dichotomy of Leadership as well. We talked about where we screwed up, where we made mistakes, what we learned from it, and hopefully other leaders at every level of any organization in business and life can learn those same lessons as well.
Absolutely. And just so we can understand, you've already talked a little bit about it, but because the books and the podcast have enriched our lives personally so much, we were wondering, why did you feel that original need to write these books, Extreme Ownership and The Dichotomy of Leadership? What was the drive behind it?
Well, Extreme Ownership was actually a very pragmatic initiation. Leif and I had started a leadership consulting business. As we worked with businesses, the businesses would ask after we would talk to them. They'd say, "Hey, do you have this information written down anywhere? Do you have it documented? Can we have something to hand out to the people that couldn't make it to this?" And eventually we realized the demand signal was high enough and we needed to write this down in a more formal manner, because we had actually written it down while we were in the military. And once we got out, we saw that there was a demand signal for people that wanted on the outside. We wrote it down, and one thing led to another, and that became Extreme Ownership. Once Extreme Ownership was out, well, then we spent the next few years continuing to work with leaders around the country and around the world, and we continued to get similar questions would pop up more often than others. And just about all the answers were, you need to balance the dichotomy of leadership. And as we continued to hear those questions, it really revealed itself that the next book we should write should focus on that dichotomy.
That's funny. It's why it seems now, having read Extreme Ownership and The Dichotomy of Leadership now, it seems like it was almost by design that you would kind of follow along to that, because that was the ultimate concept of that book, right? That was kind of what was tying Extreme Ownership together originally. Is that right?
Well, there's a reason that we closed with the chapter in Extreme Ownership that's called The Dichotomy of Leadership, because as we recognize that, people will have a tendency to try and go too extreme in one direction or the other. What we didn't realize is how much effort it would take for people to learn how to balance all those dichotomies, and that's why we focused on it in the second book.
Oh, that's fantastic. And obviously the need was there for that second book, and it's filled with everything you've been talking about striking that balance, and that's fantastic. So I know we have to let you go here, but before you go, if you don't mind, we'd like to leave you with a passage from the Havamal, Odin's Book of Wisdom, that we thought you might appreciate. "Rise early if you want to take another man's property or his life. A sleeping wolf seldom wins a sheep, or a sleeping warrior a victory. You lose more time if you sleep when it dawns. For the early riser, wealth is half won.
Well, clearly that's great words from Odin, and we certainly concur with all of them.
Just thought you might appreciate that. Thank you both for your time. It's been an honor to have you on the show, and good luck with the rest of the book release.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jocko and Leif. It's been an honor.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for spreading the word, and thanks for listening and reading what we're doing. We really appreciate it, and good luck with what you guys are doing on your endeavors. I hope it works out awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Keep getting after it.
So we're back. We've just spoken with Jocko and Leif, and as you can tell, it was a great conversation. Thank you again to Jocko Willink and Leif Babin for coming on our show. It really, really was just an absolute honor to get to speak with them. And, well, we've got a few thoughts we'd like to follow up on and just dig a little deeper into. And, yeah, that's going to be the rest of the show for today.
For sure. We'll try and keep the fanboying to a minimum, but there's going to be some. I'm sorry. It's just going to happen.
Yeah, well, I do have to emphasize, honestly, they are two of the most influential people for us, and it really was amazing that they were able to take the time. They were willing to take the time out of their busy book release day to speak with us. So, yeah, again, check out their book, The Dichotomy of Leadership and Extreme Ownership. And we'll have all of their social media information down below here as well. But for the most part, it's at Jocko Willink, at Leif Babin, if you want to connect with them too. So,
absolutely. So would you like to start off with some of the ideas, or should I? Okay.
Yeah, sure. So I think what we mostly made the connection with, well, as a starting point anyway here, is that a lot of what we talk about in the Havamal reflects what Jocko and Leif are talking about when they say balance, and they say that that's the dichotomy. That's what you have to balance. And when we've talked about balance, there's a lot of different examples. For example, we talk about some literal things such as moderation while drinking. And I mean, that one has kind of been fairly obvious, where you can see the consequences of drinking too much. But the thing about it too is that we're not saying don't drink ever. It's because
no, exactly. In the Havamal, they say, Odin says, drink your fill, but not to excess. Like, that's not the exact wording, but that's basically what it is. Drink, but don't overdo it.
Yeah. So the whole thing with that is just that you have to strike that balance kind of on a literal sense on such a mundane thing, sort of mundane as consuming alcohol. But then it goes to kind of a deeper metaphorical sense. So a lot of what we talked about, if you remember our Havamal episodes, or if you want to go back for a reminder, that's episodes 4, 6, 9, 13. We've done a lot of Havamal episodes now. Yeah, another theme that comes up fairly regularly is just that of moderation in general, and that's never stated explicitly, but it's sort of moderation and humility kind of combined to be the two things that you need to do, such as listening to the wise person. Something like the foolish man doesn't know when to stop talking, but never has anyone to speak for him when it is time to go to court, something like that. I'm not reading from there's too many passages we could go into for me to just be flipping through the book. That'd be boring. But yeah, those are a lot of the threads that we dig into.
For sure. I'm also thinking of the one about how the cows even know how to eat moderately, but yeah, because it's funny. Cows are smarter than us.
They might be. They might have this whole thing figured out. Live a nice, happy life, eating grass in a field, and then go to the slaughterhouse sort of thing. But that doesn't sound that appealing.
No.
Another passage that I really liked, that I think was actually really, really on point with what they're talking about, though, in terms of balance, was the one that talks about how it's good to be wise but not overly wise. And I think that gets into some of the concepts that Odin is really exemplifying in general. And by that, I think that was a complex stanza that wasn't really so much to say that you shouldn't be too wise and you shouldn't go out for wisdom, but it was to say something like, if you do get wisdom and you do understand it, you need to know that you have that responsibility from that point. And it just shows how hard it is to live in a certain balanced state. And that really is one of the key points here, is that living life in balance is really hard. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to live on that path. I mean, all of Buddhism essentially kind of comes from that whole concept of the middle way, not going to any one extreme, and that was considered revolutionary in its day. And so now they're talking about balance here, and it's really just something that it's hard to live by, and Odin understands that in the Havamal here. But it's also just really clear, though, that the rewards of living life in a balanced sense, it's worth it.
Absolutely. And it actually even goes before Buddhism with Aristotle and Nicomachean Ethics, where he goes through like, how are you supposed to live? And it's this golden path, which is the middle way between the extremes. So it's an ancient idea. And this is what really impresses me about the Dichotomy of Leadership, the book, and just sort of what Jocko and Leif talk about in general. These ideas that they're putting forward, these ancient ideas, have sort of grown in different regions of the world, like independently of each other. They've survived the test of time, and they've also been tested and proven valuable in war, which is basically the most extreme human circumstance you can put something in. So, like, this is like golden information they're passing on to people. And it's also amazing that they came to these conclusions by living it out. And these other figures like Buddha and Aristotle, they came to it through thinking and reasoning. Like, to me, that's what proves that there is real value in it, is that no matter what road you take, this is where you come to. So there's got to be something real there.
I definitely agree with that. And that's one of the key points here, is that just by us sort of saying that their ideas have ancient roots, or at least ancient parallels, that really is not to say that what they're doing is anything derivative. Their books are fantastic pieces, and they're absolutely unique in the way that they are portrayed. I mean, it's kind of like it's war stories in the middle of a business book, like a business leadership book, but the lessons apply almost universally, like they were talking about, and it really is just amazing that they came to these ideas about balance, about ownership, about everything. They came to this because it was the best strategies that they could come up with while in one of the most intense situations humanly imaginable, honestly. And, well, this was how they created order from the chaos around them. And of course, they certainly touched on it, and that's a key idea too, is that, you know, you can order the world too much, right? And that's never the situation you want to be in. I mean, too much order, that's the tyranny of today it would be called the patriarchy. It's the tyranny of a world order, or a world mindset, world view that just cannot accept any deviation from its orthodoxy. It's too rigid. It can never change. It can never grow. And so you need that balance. You need to always be on that edge. That's what the hero's journey really is being on that edge.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, why we see during Ragnarok, when Thor kills the Midgard serpent and finally like puts perfect order into the world, he dies as well, because you have to have both. Otherwise, and I mean, I don't think we can put it any more clearly and in real terms than Jocko did, that if you have too much order, you can't enjoy life. But if you have too much freedom or chaos, your life is a mess. I mean, you absolutely need that balance. And we see that represented in the myths again and again.
Right. And I want to just touch on I like that you mentioned freedom there. I just want to touch on a little bit about how kind of their terminology and ours sort of matches up a little bit. And we touched on it just a little bit, but a big thing for Jocko, and this is more specifically something from the Jocko podcast as opposed to their books, but one thing that he says regularly is that discipline equals freedom. And it's in the book too, right?
It's an extreme ownership. There's a chapter on it. And then they refer back to it in the Dichotomy of Leadership.
Right. So it's not just from the Jocko podcast. That's just more where I heard it more and more anyway. But
plus he talks about it like every episode because it's such an important concept in life and everything. So yeah.
Right. And so if we were relating the two things together, if we're sort of saying, and we are kind of making the assertion here, discipline is fairly equivalent to order, or at least intentional order, something like that. Like you are disciplining yourself to make out of the chaos of your messed up life, you are going to discipline it and bring it into order. And that's what discipline is. And discipline is that sacrifice to do the things that are hard, but that you know are going to be beneficial to you. So for Jocko's case, he gets up every morning and takes a picture of his watch. And that's to show everyone who follows him on Twitter, Instagram, all that. That's to show everyone that he is getting up and he is getting after it, meaning having a workout in this particular case. And I'm not trying to imply that everyone needs to do that. In fact, you know, that's not going to be a good thing for everyone, but it's how Jocko disciplines his life so that he has the freedom to continue to be better. And well, they certainly go into the concept of discipline equals freedom much better than I ever could. But discipline being sort of equivalent to order, at least in a symbolic sense, or at least discipline is part of order. But then the funny thing here too, though, freedom would definitely be chaos, because in freedom, it's completely unknown what you could do with that. You can do anything with that. And you could do a lot of negative things with that. But the implication is by being disciplined and making order out of the world, you can enjoy the freedom and the flexibility that emerges around you.
Absolutely. And the sort of the real world, I guess, examples of that would be something like with Jocko working out, you know, at 4:30 in the morning every day. You know, because he's disciplined enough to do that, he has the freedom to basically, I mean, he's getting a little older now, but he's got the physical freedom to do sort of whatever a human body can do. Like, he's able to do it still. And that's an impressive bit of freedom right there.
Yeah, to put it mildly, Jocko could probably kill 99.9% of the world's population in hand-to-hand combat if he needed to. Even higher? Something like that? He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and is incredibly strong. Just, you can tell by looking at him.
Well, I mean, in addition to being a highly decorated former Navy SEAL, and anytime you see him like on the podcast or in interviews or whatever, like the feeling you get is, at least for me, is like, thank goodness he's on our side, because you also get, he is definitely the warrior archetype, and he lives for battle. So does Leif Babin. Like, they're both warriors. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, Leif is also in that category of, like, in hand-to-hand combat, there's not many people in the world that could best him.
Exactly. And that's not to downplay Leif or anything like that. Jocko has the podcast, but Leif is a regular guest, and
they're also business partners, and, you know, they basically call each other brothers because they've been through so much together and really ordered so much chaos together.
Jocko and Leif, to me, is sort of like the friend goals for, you know, what we're doing here. It's like they do so much together and have a fruitful and productive partnership, and they're obviously, you know, fantastic friends. And so, you know, that's a goal.
I feel the same way.
Thanks, Dan. No, so this is all just to say, though, what Jocko and Leif are saying, it's really coming from a practical place. Like they discovered everything that they talk about talked about through their experiences. And that really is just to show that the things that we've been digging into when we read about the myths, that's what we want to find. And it's like they have done the things necessary to find the truth that we're looking for in the myths that we read. We're looking for these ancient truths, and they're finding it by going out there and doing it. And you know, what that says to me is that, you know, you can read all this stuff that we're doing, and that's sort of one way to learn. But another way to learn how to succeed and how to be a hero is to go be a hero. And the point I'm trying to get at here is that is incredibly hard. Like, they go through how selective the Navy SEALs just getting into it is. It's incredibly selective. You'll have hundreds of, and maybe even thousands of people in the U.S. Navy who want to join the SEALs, but they only select something like 16 a year or something like that into officers' candidacy for the SEALs, something like that. And it's incredibly selective. You have to be in tip-top physical shape just to get in, and then beyond that, it's like these are some of the best leaders, and they all go into the most dangerous situations. There was a story that Jocko tells and actually this was his retirement speech from the Navy, and you can hear this better on episode 11 of the Jocko podcast, but the gist of it is that they were going into one of the worst parts of Ramadi, and well, they were going to send a group of them into the worst part of Ramadi, and Jocko wasn't going to make any of his men go there, so he was going to kind of open it up to volunteers only. And he sort of said, okay, here, I'm going to open up this whiteboard and write your name down here if you would like to go to, it was called Camp Corregidor. It was this base right in the middle of eastern Ramadi, just where it was the worst. They were under constant attack all the time, danger of being hurt or killed constantly.
And even in the base, I seem to recall that like they were getting mortar attacks on the base. Like there wasn't like a safe spot. They were right on the front line in that base. Yeah.
Exactly. And so he leaves the room after saying, you know, write your name down if you want to volunteer to go. Comes back into the room, you know, a few minutes later, something like that. Every single SEAL in his team had written their name down. And that just shows the type of people that, well, Jocko and Leif are one of them, but also like just in general that these warriors absolutely are. And they're going and doing this heroic thing. And well, that's one way to learn how to be a hero, is to go be a hero. And that's hard. That's not easy. And I mean, what we can learn here from the myths is fantastic knowledge, but to learn it from experience is on a whole other level, I think.
For sure. And I know Leif talked about how important failure was as well. And that's how they learned, and that's how they were able to teach like the other teams who were going to replace them how to do better. And I think we shy away from failure a lot, but that's, if you're going to actually go out and learn things, it is the hard way, but I feel like that has a negative connotation because like, well, why didn't you just read it in a book? But it's like, if you want to go read it or learn about it in the experiential way, you are going to fail. That's just how you're going to learn. And to be able to come back, especially when the stakes are so high, like, I mean, people did die. Like some of their best friends died. And yet they were able to sort of pick themselves up, brush themselves off and get back into the chaos and keep trying to put order into it. So it's remarkable and, well, I mean, quite humbling because, you know, here we are just like reading about it and having a good time doing it and everything. But like these people lived it. And that, I think that's also the value of why we're talking about them on a Norse mythology podcast, is that in these stories, the lessons that are there are the exact ones that they lived. And I just can't that just blows my mind. Like I can't wrap my head around how amazing that is that you can actually link the two, because like there's no reason you should be able to, right? But here it is, and you can.
Yeah, we read about heroes. I mean, we just had Hymiskvida, which was Thor's adventure of fetching the cauldron, and I mean, it's a little bit of a wacky story, of course, just kind of in the details. But Thor is going out there and being the hero, and we're going to be reading sagas and more Norse mythology and more of the Kalevala, and we're going to hear more and more and more about heroes. Jocko and Leif are real life heroes, and they've done the remarkable thing of taking the lessons they learned while they were being just under the most intensive circumstances and learning how to survive, because if they didn't do that, they would have died, right? And I mean, again, however you feel about war in the modern day, or feel about the Iraq war in particular, or about conflict or whatever,
sort of the political reasons behind it, like however you feel about that, that's one thing, and certainly like valid and should be talked about. But just on the ground level and the interpersonal level, like they are heroes, sort of no matter how you slice it. Like,
yeah, and trust us when we say that they were doing it for all the right reasons, and they really wanted to bring peace to this region of the world that was just torn by war. And yeah, if you read Extreme Ownership, if you read The Dichotomy of Leadership, if you listen to the Jocko podcast, you can watch it on YouTube if you want. I hope that's something that you understand about them. That's my understanding of Jocko and Leif, and that is why I look up to them the way I do. And they really are examples for me personally. I mean, prior to even us looking at starting a podcast sort of thing, you know, Jocko's work and Leif's work, it was really quite something. It came to me in a very particular moment in my life. I was just about to have most of my life kind of opened up, and I had nothing to focus on, nothing to set goals on, except, you know, the mundanity of work and all that fun stuff. But their work was an inspiration to me to focus on improving myself and working to be the best I possibly can be, and really just to live my life in a way that even approaches the amazing things that they have done and the truly, truly inspirational lessons about life that they talk about.
Absolutely. No, it's pretty amazing. One, being able to talk to them, but also going through this and seeing the parallels. Some of the other ones I wanted to talk about, especially with discipline and freedom and order and chaos and how they relate. I was thinking a lot about Odin and how disciplined he is at searching for knowledge, and literally searching for knowledge for Ragnarok, and how to deal with sort of the most chaos possible. And he's got that because he has that discipline for knowledge, and we've seen him put knowledge above everything else. Like he's done terrible things in order to get knowledge. And it's also that when the time comes, he can ride into battle sort of prepared as best he can be to fight Fenrir and face that freedom and chaos. But also it's everything is coming undone in Ragnarok, right? Like it is actually freedom in the most sort of intense sense of it. I mean, if like we all think we want to live in like a free society, and we do want to, but not that free. Like we don't want to have the freedom of like killing people, or, you know, building a house but doing it poorly and selling it so that it falls on people. Like we definitely curtail that freedom, and that's what happens when you go too far into it. And I think that's sort of what what Ragnarok and like the giants and Fenrir and all that, that's like too far the other way.
Yeah, the whole thing with Ragnarok being akin to freedom, I like that a lot, because you think that that's going to be the absolute darkest that the world is ever going to be, is when it's getting destroyed, right? But that really is the essence of chaos, and freedom is that ability to have all of those outcomes. And well, the term discipline equals freedom certainly implies a positive coming out of freedom, and it does. The world gets reborn after Ragnarok. And I mean, if you agree with us in the idea that Ragnarok is metaphorical, it's not just talking about the literal end of the world, although it probably is. It's that metaphor for the destruction of your entire world when you're faced with change that cannot be ignored. And how you deal with that is whether or not you survive, and whether or not you survive in a better place. And that's what Odin really is doing, I think. Odin is working as hard as he can constantly to be, first of all, the best that he can be and as prepared as possible for Ragnarok, searching for knowledge, searching for answers. He wants to see that he doesn't have to go through this, he doesn't have to die, but even when he learns that there's no alternative, he goes and he faces it, and he faces it head on, and you know what? The world gets reborn. So,
and really, like, what more could you ask for, right? Is a world that's reborn. And it sort of makes me think of Baldur as well, because of course Baldur's death is the sort of the catalyst for Ragnarok. But then after Ragnarok, in the new world, Baldur is reborn as well, as kind of the chief god. He's always the best and the brightest and most beloved and strongest and all that good stuff, and still is in the reborn world, but is now, he kind of takes his father's spot as chief, right? But there's something that I think it was Jocko talked about, and in the Dichotomy of Leadership, this is like the first story and sort of the ultimate dichotomy. Jocko in the book talks about loving the many commands, but still having to send them out into battle. And when he was talking with us, he talked about, you've got your children who you love very much, but you have to let them rub up against painful things and failure and all those types of things that will let them grow and change and get stronger. Well, we have a good example of Frigg actually ignoring that advice and doing her best to make sure that nothing can harm Baldur. And I haven't been able to sort of think this all the way through, because we actually did just talk to Jocko and Leif. But I think there's something there that by sort of protecting Baldur too much, she prevented something very important from happening. Sort of maybe even the ability to protect himself or not be in a situation that is kind of dumb, because the way he died was him and his friends were like throwing stuff at him because he was invulnerable, right? If he maintained, maybe it's if he maintained a sense of humility that he was still vulnerable, that wouldn't have happened. And that maybe humility is one of the big lessons here, in that if you maintain humility in all of this, then you're in a better spot.
The episode where we covered this originally was so long ago, I can't remember if we ever got onto anything quite like that, but I don't think so. So I think Jocko and Leif just gave us some new insight into the story of Baldur, huh?
Well, that's pretty good.
Definitely pretty good. It was a very good conversation, and really, again, I think we're truly honored to have been able to speak with them. No, I think that point was fantastic, though. It's right on. It's a different side to that story than I had thought, because there's a lot of dynamics with the story of Balder, but and how Frigg is kind of going about it. But see, it dovetails again with what Jocko is saying, what Leif is saying. Yeah.
All this to say that, that's why we had them on the show, and that's why we're talking about this book, is that it's an actual, like, real, it's not a myth or even a story. It's real life examples that are in some ways fed by these myths, right? Like it's all going in the same direction. It's all, these ideas have been around for a long, long time, and I still think that because of that, and because of what they've sort of, where they've arisen and where they've been proven, that there's something real there that you can depend on and really use in your life. That, I mean, life is chaotic and all this kind of stuff, and here's like this perfect guide on, and like the Dichotomy of Leadership is pretty explicit with how you deal with all of this stuff, and how you walk that middle road and moderate between order and chaos, and the proper ways to do that. So not to make it like an infomercial, but it's definitely worth picking up.
Yeah, this is all just to say we are going to keep doing what we do here at the Northern Myths podcast. We're going to keep exploring the mythologies of Northern Europe, these myths and legends that we find so much value in. We're going to keep doing that because really, really, we see value all the time in what we do, just on a personal level. But I will say that if you want some practical ways that you can improve your life, yeah, Extreme Ownership and the Dichotomy of Leadership. They are fantastic books. The Dichotomy of Leadership can be read on its own. It absolutely can be. They give a really good introduction to it, and a lot of the concepts from Extreme Ownership, they talk about them. So whichever one you want to kind of pick up first is up to you. You'll get something out of both of them. If you read the Dichotomy of Leadership first, then go back and read Extreme Ownership, then you'll get more out of your experience reading Dichotomy of Leadership. But the whole thing is really just to say they have lived and they've experienced, and these are the lessons that they have for us. And again, we'll keep doing what we do because we love it, and we really see the value in exploring these stories and learning more. It's the continuous search for knowledge, really. Not to put ourselves on the same level as Odin or anything. That's really just to say Odin is very inspirational to us, is maybe the most I'll say.
As he is inspirational to everyone, as he's the god of inspiration, so very fitting.
There we go. So, but we'll keep doing what we do, and Jocko and Leif have produced some amazing books, and we highly, highly recommend them. They are really absolutely influential on us personally, and the fact that we got to talk to them, we didn't even think about how it would relate. That's what the whole rest of this show is being about, is hopefully you see why we thought it was important to talk to them, and to hopefully show you something new about Jocko and Leif if you weren't familiar with them already, which you might be.
And I think this just occurred to me. I think why they have these lessons to share is that they actually found the myth they were living and lived it, and were able to bring it back. And like, this is the treasure from the underworld that they're bringing us. They went into it, and now it's here for everyone.
Yeah, it might not be Old Norse poetry translated brilliantly by Dr. Jackson Crawford, or, Kalevala poetry as compiled by Elias Lundrope. It's just as good, though, honestly, because it's that same thing, that treasure from the underworld. They couldn't have put it better. I don't have anything more to say, and frankly, we've already hit our traditional ending already.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty good. I don't think there's much left in my brain. I'm still pretty still pretty, my words are failing because it was pretty awesome to talk to them. Like, it was a pretty big highlight. So
Yeah, exactly. So maybe just to recap here a little bit as far as their social media. So we'll include all this below if you want to get in touch with Jocko and Leif. Jocko, for the most part, is at Jocko Willink. We'll give the whole list underneath, but at Jocko Willink, and Leif is at Leif Babin on Twitter. On Instagram, he's at Real Leif Babin. And thank you to them. Thank you to St. Martin's Press for providing us with advanced copies so we could read the book before today. And actually,
that was also cool.
That was also cool. So thank you to everyone involved. And of course, you can get a hold of us at Northern Myths on Facebook and Twitter, and Northern Myths Podcast on Instagram and YouTube. And honestly, I'd like to leave it at that, because this was about Jocko and Leif and the fantastic things we're doing and our appreciation. And you know about us, and you know how to get a hold of us. And so please do, if you would like. And of course, we always appreciate a subscribe or a social media share, but also go check out Jocko and Leif and Extreme Ownership and the Dichotomy of Leadership. Extreme influences on us, and powerful, powerful reason why we started this show.
Absolutely. And I guess I'll say two last things. One, we might have made it sound like a self-help book, but it isn't, because it's actually real things. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that it's not like a self-help book. It's sort of an actual manual. And I mean, they even talked about writing it during the war. So at least Extreme Ownership, but Dichotomy of Leadership comes right out of that. So
I actually didn't know that either. I mean, I've listened to hours and hours of all this stuff, and maybe just that detail, maybe I missed it somewhere, but I didn't know that they had actually come up with a lot of this stuff while they were serving, which is quite something.
Yeah, it's quite something. And so I think that really leaves only one thing, and we've talked about it a bit, and we've talked about how Jocko and Leif have already done it, but I think now it's time for all of us to go find the myth we're living.
This has been the Northern Myths Podcast. Thanks for listening.